Hey folks, welcome to another episode of Code to Cloud. I've got a exceptional guest on this week's episode. I was doing my daily peruse of the LinkedIn files, right? I came across David Beale, right? Who was well regarded in the engineering space. So I just reached out to him like I generally do, just slid into his DMs, went, "Hey, would you like to come on the Code to Cloud podcast?" And he was like, "Who's this weird British guy?" Anyway, without further ado, David, welcome to the show. Do you just want to quickly introduce yourself?
Kevin, absolutely. Thank you. So happy to be here. I'm David Beale. I'm based in Chicago, Illinois. I am an artist and technologist, a father, a husband, a friend, and I've been working in the DevOps space for about 12 years at this point. And I have a pretty long history in software engineering and sort of computers in general.
So you actually meet the resume requirements now because, when they put that you need 10 years of experience or more, right? You actually beat that. I mean, that's quite a feat, right? Like 12 years in DevOps, like you're a veteran. Like, so if we wind the clock back, when did you get started in DevOps?
Well, I mean, honestly, I got started in DevOps in 1999 when I installed Slackware on my HP Pavilion. Like wrote my first bash scripts and started playing around with Python and stuff like that. I have a long history as a skateboarder and a musician, and I was also very poor, but I had a computer and had internet. So I figured out how to get skate videos and records and, movies and stuff like that long before, well, not super long, but long before mainstream file sharing. And that required a little bit of hackery and honestly DevOps. You had to kind of build your own infrastructure and deploy your IRC bot and figure out how to download as much as you could on your dial-up connection and all that sort of stuff. So in earnest though, around 2020, I had some Ruby experience. I was working in industrial computing and we had a lot of Perl scripts. Did a little Reddit research and found out about Chef and ended up replacing about 450,000 lines of Perl with a couple of cookbooks. And I was like, wow, this seems like a thing.
I mean, those are terms from a blast from the past, right? You're talking about chef and that kind of thing. I remember those being all over job boards, right? When people were looking for consultants, especially, right? When people were starting this cloud thing. Was that roughly like around 2013, 2014 when you were doing chef, or was it a bit earlier than that or a bit later?
Yeah, I think 2013. And let's see, when's the last time I used Chef? My company now uses Puppet. We still have Puppet in production. I guess I used Chef for the last time around 2016, 2017. So, I had a good like 3, 4 year run with it. If you got it dialed in, it was pretty great. I typically used Test Kitchen and kind of didn't have a Chef server, used it more like Ansible, just with like Ruby. So, it was an era. I think Ansible was kind of the clear winner as time progressed. Like, Ansible's still like a pretty viable tool. You combine it with Packer and kind of do the like golden image AMI thing. You can have pretty successful like immutable image based deployments with that. So yeah.
So, just for the folks listening in, they might not know what chef is, right? That's a configuration manager, am I right? From
It
memory.
is. Yeah, it was probably the most popular CF tool in that era, like 2012, 2013, 2014. It was, in use in a lot of the, Etsy and some of the other big name DevOps shops. But essentially what it did is it gave you an API to use Ruby as a DSL to manage infrastructure components. So you could have a Chef server that would sit and like watch for new nodes to join a group, be that in like a cider block or, however it was sequestered, and they would configure them. It'd be like, oh, the new EC2 just popped on. Let's bootstrap it with, JVM and whatever else it needs to run this big honking Java app. But then you could also use it the way that I did, which is you might have like Jenkins or a CI tool, just use that Chef cookbook to bootstrap an AMI that you spun up with like Packer or another tool like that. So it just becomes like a configuration tool ad hoc in your CI process. I think we started leaning more towards that, like as time went on, and then Ansible was a clear winner because it was just lighter, less bloated.
Yeah, I mean, Ansible's still going strong, right? Like it's a Red Hat tool. Interesting to see what's going to happen now with the IBM acquisition of HashiCorp, right? Terraform and Ansible together, I think, is the story, right, that they're pursuing.
Yeah.
Can't be a bad thing, but yeah, when you talk about those tools, like when I think about how when I got into cloud, right, and started to use these tools, like roughly around the same time, like 2014, like Azure didn't have those tool sets yet. Like we take all that stuff for granted now, right? Like you can use Terraform, Bicep, Pulumi, right, to deploy the infrastructure, but then Ansible for the configuration. But when did like I only started using Packer back in, I'm gonna say 2019, and we set up a pipeline process to effectively build AVD images. So that's Azure Virtual Desktop. So during the pandemic, right, everybody had to go remote, and guess what? AVD was like the biggest seller of that year, right? And just remember the first time we got Packer working and just set the pipeline off and come back 2 years later and you had a complete gold image, right? If you won't even want to call it that, right? Completely deployed. So yeah, when you were starting out there, that was mostly with virtual machines, right?
Yeah. Yeah. A little containerization here and there. Like I think I messed around with like Mesosphere pretty early on,
Right.
Docker Swarm maybe around like 2015. But at that point, I was using Docker and containerization more for like local development, or even just like I have an EC2 and I'm using like systemd to spin up a bunch of Docker containers on it to do something.
I mean, it's still an early adopter at that stage, right? I was literally, I had the guy who founded Docker. He was CTO, Solomon, right?
Mhm.
And he was saying it only came out in 2013. So you starting to like use it in 2015. That was pretty much of a game changer. Let's walk through your career a little bit. So you start off using those technologies a little bit. What kind of job roles were you currently? Was it just operations engineering roles, or were they called something else at the time?
I bounced around honestly. So I turned 40 this year. So I'm peak millennial. So we're talking, 2006, 2008, that era, there were no jobs. Like, especially where I'm from in Virginia. Like, maybe the economy collapsed in 2008, like globally, but it collapsed in Virginia, like when I was in high school. And so my first ever tech job, I worked as a seasonal COBOL developer at a toy warehouse. And I didn't know COBOL. And essentially, it was an old like IBM AS400 system with hand scanners for scanning inventory, and it broke every night. So my job was just to read through all this documentation and figure out how to fix it, and then import all the scans from the day before and update like a database. And so I did that for about 3 or 4 months, and then I was like, I do not want to work in technology. That was horrible. And so I cooked in restaurants for a couple of years. And as my friends started getting degrees and graphic design, they started having web work that they needed to do. And I was like, I can do that. So I taught myself PHP and, learned WordPress and some Cold Fusion. And I built a lot of websites for like restaurants and dentist office with scheduling assistants and, started doing some real web programming. And I would actually just buy VPSs to host them. So, I'm managing all these websites. I have VPSs. I start, using Rails more, using tools like Capistrano for deployments. Still not using CI/CD, just everything cowboyed from the computer. But more and more I'm writing bash scripts, and I have like a Python script that I can just spin up a Ubuntu server to like run Rails and install a database and like all that sort of stuff. So I'm kind of doing DevOpsy work and I don't even know it. I'm just a $25 an hour freelance web developer in Virginia, giving these people, hosting and world class service basically at the scale that they're at. And so then I get a job finally in 2012, full time job, and that's when I first used Chef to replace all those Perl scripts. And then, I'm kind of in my upper mid 20s at this point. I've just been in Virginia my whole life. I don't want to be there anymore. My personal life kind of takes a dive and I use that as an opportunity. My friend is living in New York in a studio apartment on 34th and Park above a Cold Stone Creamery. And he's like, I got a futon. You'll have no privacy, but like you can crash with me. So I just left, went to New York, started trying to find a job. Within 3 weeks, I had a DevOps job. And just basically worked with Rails companies that were migrating from Heroku to AWS for years. That's pretty much what I did, either as a contractor, freelance, or in full-time capacities, mostly Series A, Series B startups.
That's wild, man.
Yeah.
I mean, making a trip like that, right? I was there in the financial crash as well. I didn't move to New York though. I joined the military. That was my get out, right? But yeah, so you moved to New York, a couple of DevOps roles, working for startups. How was it like working for a startup? I mean, you have to wear many hats, right? It's normally, pull up your sleeves, right, and get into it. Like, what kind of things were you doing on a daily basis there?
Yeah, man. Honestly, just jumping in, it was trial by fire. There was so many terms and things I didn't know. I didn't really know version control that well, or CI/CD, and like that's a big part of DevOps. So I really had to get up to speed quickly. I hadn't touched AWS, and all these companies were AWS. So
Yeah.
I was literally just going to interviews. I probably interviewed for 40 jobs over the course of a couple weeks, right? And I just bombed them. But I'd sit and take notes. Everything I didn't know, I'd write down, and I'd go home that night and I'd figure it out. So each time, I just did a little better, picking up momentum, and then eventually it was like, all right, I just know what I'm doing by failing. And so when I got my first job, I was definitely in over my head, and it was a lot of going to work, just banging my head all day, Stack Overflow, Google. Didn't have ChatGPT, didn't have LMs to help me out, and just learning, and then going home, you know, drinking coffee and probably a couple beers, and staying up late and figuring out all the stuff that I couldn't figure out how to do that day, and just trying to keep my head above water. And it took years to really get comfortable. I was faking it until I made it, and I really didn't know when that transition happened, but eventually I just kind of knew what I was doing.
Yeah, I can resonate with that a little bit. It's kind of weird, right? I sort of give this out as a bit of a tip for people. So I think it was around 2016. I was studying for the AWS Cloud Solution Architect exams. Do you remember when they came out, right? Like A Cloud Guru and all that kind of good stuff. I literally, because they were the first ones to it, right? They had like a career path and everything else. So I studied and passed that. And guess what? Every role that I went for was Azure. So check your market before you jump in, right? It's probably, I try to tell people all the time, right? If the majority of companies are using a hyperscaler, then guess what? In your area where you want to work, right? Then dial in on that, right? Because it's very hard to specialize on all of them because they're so deep these days, right? So even if you're just trying to find your entry level job, it's better to focus in on one, right? It helps if it's one of the popular ones, right? Like, I know there's some wild cards out there, but like, guess what? No one's ever going to use them in production, right? Unless it's some sort of bedroom project. But yeah, really try and dial that in, right? That would
Yeah,
be a tip.
I agree to a certain extent, but I would challenge it in saying build cloud agnostic skills too. Like that's the beauty of things like Terraform and Pulumi.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
They do work cross cloud now, and the providers are similar. Really, man, this is controversial, and I get a lot of heat when I say this, but if you really want to be good at doing DevOps, SRE, platform engineering, whatever we call what we do on a daily basis, learn a programming language and get really good at it.
Oh, 100%.
Like,
Yeah.
like, for me, for a long time, it was Ruby. I reached for Ruby first for years and years, and then I kind of slowly shifted to Python, and that was really like the language I reached for. And then that maybe around like 2019 shifted into Go. And now I feel like I'm coming full circle because I've gotten really into Rust. And to me, Rust feels a lot like Ruby. It feels like a really powerful Ruby. It's expressive. You can metaprogram, you can lean functional, you can do whatever you want in it. And the more that I do that, the better I am at writing CI/CD pipelines, or the better my Terraform looks. The better my ability with Kubernetes is because like trying to do something weird in Kubernetes, you can spend a bunch of time trying to square peg a round hole, or you can write a little CRD. And being effective and knowing how to like build software will really, really help you when it comes to deploying infrastructure, all that sort of stuff. You really got to know what you're shipping before you can ship it.
No, I completely agree. Terraform, like straight away, right? Like that is probably universally the industry leader when it comes to domain specific languages, right? Or infrastructure as code tools. Get that underneath your belt. Yeah, I mean the Python and Go thing, like a lot of stuff is in Go now, right?
Yeah.
Like a lot. I blogged about it or I posted about it at the weekend. Kubernetes is written in Go, Terraform's written in Go, Dagger's written in Go, right? There's so many like infrastructure tool sets that are written in Go. That's only going to wait, right? But like Rust, I mean, I haven't really dabbled in it. Like, what's your experience of Rust been like? Because like I've seen, you know, people on X, people on LinkedIn talk about it, but like, what have you been using it for, and how have you found it?
So I've been playing around with basically like signal parsing and like sentiment and kind of interacting with LLMs and like trying to make really, really like optimal, incredible like prompt queries. And so a lot of that comes to doing like a bunch of pre-processing. Let's say you've got or pre-processing. Let's say you have like all these different data sources and you want to use them collectively to like create a sentiment or to create like a query that you then want to send to a LLM. But you don't want your LLM calls to be super expensive. So Rust is this incredible language where you can kind of do everything. You can do, it has like the ETL power of Python, but it has like the computational and like sort of multi-threaded capacity of like a C++ or Go. It doesn't feel as strict as Go. I don't dislike Go. I think it's a great programming language. There's a reason it's like the cloud native language. You gave that list, but like it's literally everything. Every tool under the CCNF banner basically is written in Golang at this point. And or CNC.
You got it right. You got
Yeah.
it right.
Um, but I don't know, Rust is just a little more fun. Am I writing production Rust? No. Am I playing around with it in my home lab all the time and loving it? The package manager cargo is awesome. My NeoVim configuration for Rust is great. I just like it. I don't know that I would suggest it as like a Swiss Army knife language though. Like if you're new and you're coming in, just learn Python. It's there's unless you are interested in the front end, in which case you should learn JavaScript. And you can absolutely be interested in the front end and still do DevOps because there's this whole world of edge and CDNs and static assets and all that sort of stuff that needs DevOps love, platform engineering love. So if you like visual stuff and you want to play with front ends, learn JavaScript, otherwise learn Python. And then you've got the rest of your life to play around with things like Rust or Zig or OCaml or any of the weird stuff that
Okay.
Oh, OCaml's awesome. I think it's one of the coolest languages ever. You look at a company like Jane Street, and I work in fintech. I do tend to regard fintech companies for better or for worse because I think they invest in technology. And if you ever are curious about functional programming, really research Jane Street. They do some awesome stuff with OCaml.
Okay, check that out.
Yeah.
So yeah, Python's probably a good start then, right? Like I think Pulumi is Python.
You can do it with you can
Yeah,
use Pulumi with TypeScript, Python, Go, maybe. I'm not
yeah,
sure. I think so.
potentially.
Yeah, and then Amazon CDK has most of those languages as well. I would learn Terraform or OpenTofu. HCL is a really valid syntax, and it's also a really good primer for Go. If you have used a language like Python or JavaScript, and then you start writing some Terraform, and then you learn Go, you're like, oh, okay, I can see where this is just a layer of abstraction away from Go. And writing a Terraform provider is a great way to learn Go too.
I cut my teeth on Terraform, right? Like I was the Windows Server guy, and like I missed the PowerShell revolution, as I like to call it.
Was that a revolution?
Well, I mean, it's got its fans, right? It's got its fans. That's all I'm going to say. But for me, Terraform was very logical, right, in terms of the way it was presented, and I thought it was again, even getting started with CI/CD pipelines, right, and all that good stuff. It was a good place to start. But like you said, like knowing an application language, you really need to understand the basics of programming, right, and the whole developer experience, right, to make sure that you know you get stronger at your role, right. It's probably the best way of explaining it. I mean, you just give us a bit of a snippet there, but you're using NeoVim. Is that your IDE? Is that what you're using?
Yeah, I use NeoVim,
That's
and I
pretty
use
hardcore, man.
I use NeoVim and then I use Vimium in Chrome, so I can kind of switch back and forth between Vim and Chrome really easy. And I vibe code that way. Like if I'm doing some LLM magic, it's easy. Like I don't like Cursor or any of the sort of I don't have LLMs integrated in my NeoVim. I copy and paste because I want to see what I'm pasting into
Right.
the LLM, and then I want to see what I'm pasting out of it. So or copying out of it. So yeah, man, I've been a Vim guy on and off for years. When I worked at Etsy, we were on VMs. So, you could connect it to VS Code through like the remote server or whatever, but I just like spent a week and learned some basic tmux and Vim at the time. And then I switched to NeoVim probably 2 or 3 years ago.
That's so for folks listening in going, what are these guys on about? It's a text-based developer environment, right? So it looks pretty cool. We just had a meetup, and as I was walking around and we were doing the hackathon, a guy called Jacob, he's just joined our engineering team, by the way. He's actually building a module out for NeoVim. I was like, he's using a text-based IDE, and I got him to, fair play to Jacob. He got up in front of everybody, hadn't met anyone, and he demoed it to us, and we were all like in awe, right? And what I liked about it was less is more.
Always. Yeah. It's
Yeah,
great. The cool thing with NeoVim too is you write extensions in Lua, which is a really awesome little language that doesn't get a lot of love outside of like Brazil and Adobe. But yeah, I love them. It's a great community. Like, if you're in a cafe and you see someone using Vim, that's a great conversation starter. Like, I have like close friends that the impetus for us talking was like we both use Vim.
but how you got connected, right?
Yeah,
Also good if you're, Kubernetes land again, writing YAML, using Vim, right? You get to learn those skill sets.
yeah,
It's all relatable, right?
hmm
It's not just a, look at me, I'm using Vim, right? Kind of thing. You're actually learning, especially with those Kubernetes exams, you have to use Vim, right? So maybe
yeah.
something to go and look at, right?
And so I use K9s as well for Kubernetes. So
Nice.
very Vim-like experience, and I can switch between K9s and Vim super easily. I'm using Ghosty for my terminal now, which, sorry, I'm getting slacked.
It's okay.
Which is actually written by one of the founders of HashiCorp, and it's written in a programming language called Zig. And if Rust is the new C++, then Zig is the new C. It is like really like intentional and deliberate and kind of like Go.
I've not heard of that, Ghosty. I'll have
Yeah,
to check
it's
that out.
fairly new. You should check it out. I like it a lot. It's really fast. I was using Warp for a little bit,
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah. Do you know what? I kind of like Warp because it's it's developer rich, right? In terms of experience, like I'm a fan of good graphics,
yeah,
right? Like you've got me, right? If something looks shiny and pretty, like I'm over there, right? And I really like Warp for that. Like it chunks out your commands, tells you where things go wrong, and now with the LLM support, right? It tells you where you can fix things. I think things have got better because they removed the login piece. There was some controversy around that, right?
yeah, I didn't love that.
No, but yeah, I know a few people using Warp now, full time kind of thing, and they kind of like it. But I'll definitely give Ghosty a try.
Yeah, I was full time in Warp for a bit. I kept losing my Vim buffer, and it would just crash randomly.
Right.
So I kind of lost interest there. But I think Warp is written in Rust, so that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I don't know if I was able to get K9s running in Warp properly. Because you know the way it like chunks out the terminal, right, with sections when you complete a command, it couldn't present it properly, right?
Are you in Linux subsystem?
I'm not. I'm on Mac. So yeah.
Naughty boy.
Well, it's the cloud native journey, my friend,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah, I'm
yeah,
a Mac guy generally too. I have a Linux box and I like to work in Linux, but specifically day to day, I'm on a 15-inch MacBook Air, which is my favorite computer I've ever had.
I literally people people know this in the community. I got my first Mac last year. I'm never going back, dude. It was like a lifetime achievement award because like I couldn't afford one for the past 20 years. And
Yeah.
then I was like, okay, I've got enough money to buy one now, right? I get a lot of heat at work about it, right? As you can probably well imagine, right? A lot of banter. But I'm a big fan of WSL. I mean, they literally just open sourced that yesterday as well.
On the joke. That's
Yeah,
cool.
yeah. So like, I mean, for years, I was the same with you. I tried to use Linux I tried to use it as a full-time desktop for about 2 years because sometimes going cold turkey is the best way, right? And I was using a mixture between Ubuntu and Fedora. I was distro hopping for a while, and the problem is it was the office tools, man, that got me. And in my day-to-day job, like I need that Teams in my life, right? So, but to your point, that is something free and accessible that people can just get start on that can introduce you into that ecosystem that you were just talking about with the developer tools, right? Like all those terminals and applications we've just gone on about, you can probably get in Linux, right?
Oh yeah. You can buy a Lenovo ThinkPad with like a nice i5 processor and 16 gigs of RAM and totally usable machine, probably an SSD even for like 150 $200. You can install Linux on it, and if you do that, you're already going to be halfway there to learning what we do. Like buy a laptop, get Linux installed on it, start playing around with it, learn some bash, like learn how to build some stuff, like make a makefile. There's all kinds of really easy stuff that you can do that like ramps you up into programming. And I feel like we don't talk about that enough. It's like, learn JavaScript, learn React, like, learn Python, but like no one's like install Linux on something. Like it just really goes a long way. And I mean, you can even do it in a VM. Like you don't have to buy hardware for that.
You used to do that back in the day, VirtualBox, right? Install Ubuntu. But yeah, even my cluster, my Kubernetes cluster at home, it's an Intel NUC. I think it's an i9, and I just chuck 64 gigs of RAM in there. People are like, that's not enough. I was like, yeah, but the base operating system only uses 800 meg, right? So for a lab environment, it's probably overkill, right? But there's weird and wonderful ways that you can build these like little labs out, right, with limited hardware. Like even if you just go on Facebook Marketplace, right? Like the ThinkPad is it's sort of like not a baptism of fire, but like a righteous passage, right? That people do, like they resurrect those old ThinkPads, right, and stick
Yeah.
a Linux distro on there. I love hearing those stories, right, and
Oh,
see
yeah.
how people resurrect hardware.
Yeah, YouTube, like hardware hackers, that's a pastime of mine. I resurrected an old Dell server, and so I have that running for like a media box. But my home Kubernetes lab is 6 Raspberry Pis.
Hardcore. So you've got one as the controller, right, and the rest of the nodes, right?
Yeah, and
Yeah,
so I did the Kelsey Hightower like
the
build
hard
Kubernetes
way.
hard way,
Yeah,
swapped it across 6 Raspberry Pis with like an old Meraki switch, and just I think it maybe cost $300 for the entire setup.
for our folks in Canada, that'd probably be about 900 Canadian. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's a good it's a good way to do it. K-freeze, um, kind, even Docker, right? Like, just get started, right? Maybe just build it out. Like, creating those Docker files, I also introduces another level of skill, right? That you learn. So maybe go and check that out. So I just want to segue on because I'm conscious of time here. But your blog, man, and I really like the title, Control Alt Resist, right? How did that come about? Tell me what was going on there. I mean, catchy name.
Yeah. So I believe that the internet was a gift. I really do. And I think that, our generation especially, like, man, we are just the OG internet kids, between like IRC and ICQ and AOL Instant Messenger and Cult of the Dead Cow and like all these other tropes of sort of early internet. Like I was there and I saw it and I know what it was like. And I think that it's been stolen. I think the internet has been completely stolen by bots and advertising and just all the sort of pillars of like techno feudalism, as people like to call it. And I think we can take it back. I really do. And so Control Alt Resist is my way of sort of telling my story, how I got here, how I built this career. I don't have a high school diploma. I didn't go to college. I just learned. I just, figured it out as I went. And I think that so much of being a good infrastructure engineer is the ability to do that. So I'm trying to kind of document that. I'm also trying to give people tools for, DIY everything. I think everyone should have a home lab. I think everyone should be building their own servers and, hosting internet facing applications. And I think that's the way we take back the internet. Like love the cloud. make my living on it. It's awesome. Learn the cloud, love the cloud, use the cloud. But let's build our own little corner too. Let's the hackers who built all this in the first place, I think are starting to take it back. And Control Alt Resist is just my little corner of the internet where most recently I wrote a series called A People's History of DevOps. And as you can tell, there's a political slant to this. I'm someone who's kind of faced a little bit of kind of economic and, just sort of class politics all my life. And technology can really help me break out of that. So, it's just sort of I call it my home for post-capitalist web, whatever that means.
Post-capitalist web. I love it. I couldn't agree more because, and that's something I advocate as well, is doesn't matter about your background, you can learn your way out of a situation.
It's never easier. Like we had to do it the hard way, man. You remember
Books.
printing out, going to the library and printing out documentation because you didn't have a second computer to read documentation on while you were doing stuff that broke your computer and you couldn't get on the internet. Like literally the first time I ever installed Linux, I had to go to the library the next day and print out a bunch of stuff to figure out how to fix my swap or some crap.
Do you know what? I look very fondly at libraries. People go, yeah, that's such a community place and a great source of knowledge. I was like, no, they had high-speed internet, right? And a bank of like 8 machines that you could use.
Mm-hmm.
And I would spend like 2 hours a day after school, right? Just searching the internet and learning stuff. And then I would, similar to you, like get those Red Hat books, right? And I'd go home and try and figure out what was going on because no one will know the pain of a 56K dial-up modem, my friend, right? Like today's, like my kids complain with the 1 gigabit pipe that I've got at home. I'm like, this is luxury.
Well, I'll tell you what, man, a lot of people think back on those days and, we're like, oh, it's so much better now, like blah, 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 blah. But when I hear the sound of the 6K dial-up modem, I hear freedom. I hear freedom. Like I grew up in a pretty gnarly household. My parents were addicts and there was a lot of generational trauma. And my dad saw my aptitude and we did not have money. We lived in a single wide trailer in rural Virginia, but he got me a computer and he got internet access for me. And, at a pretty early age, I think I was 13 or 14. And man, it set me free. That was my life. That was my connection to the world, my connection to everything. Like I would not be sitting here if I hadn't had that. So, that's a beautiful sound for me.
Yeah, it's those first moments of experiencing something, right? Is the way that you sort of expand outside of the 4 walls that you're in at the time, right? Like you're speaking to people from other countries or of other end of the country that you're situated in, or you're coming across a piece of knowledge, or you're hitting up a bulletin board, right? Like those kind of things. It was a magical time. It really was.
It was. But the thing is, it's still here in different shapes and forms. Like Discord, that's IRC, man. That's IRC for Generation
100%.
Z.
Yeah.
Like, and I love it. I'm in so many Discord servers. Like, I absolutely love it. And that feels so old internet to me. I mean, even I don't know if you've seen it, but there's like a whole like community of people that are building these like old school websites that look like, like GeoCities or what were the other ones?
GeoCities. That's taking me back. I was trying to think of a search engine that I used to use back in the late 90s, and I think it was called Alta Vista?
Alta Vista, yeah.
Alta Vista, yeah, .net, right?
Yeah. That
There
was one
was
of the
that. Yeah.
Lycos. You remember Lycos?
Wow. That was the dog, right? Was that the dog?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I was trying to remember the website for, was it called megacd.net? I think that's what it was called. I don't know if you ever used that, but it was.
Use that.
I never did this personally, but friends at school would go on there to get cracks for their games, right? And if you don't know what cracks were, they were like, that was the way that software used to get distributed, right? And the underground back in the day. But yeah, GeoCities, that if a website didn't exist, you landed on a GeoCities page. So if you typed in something in the URL bar, it would take you to a GeoCities page, right? So that's pretty wild, man. So we're getting towards the end of the show here. I just want to ask you, 3 essential skills that you think people should try and focus on. I know we talked about some of the programming languages, but maybe we just want to revisit this. But 3 skills you'd recommend to the listeners to focus on for this year, right? To either support their development or aid their career, right? To becoming a DevOps engineer.
Yeah. Let's start with a non-technical one. You should start investing in a creative hobby. And that doesn't mean that you have to like make art, but you should consume it. You know, if you've never gotten into jazz, pick up a couple Miles Davis, John Coltrane records. If you've never really dug into like the cinema or like movies in general, you know, like pick a director that you might resonate with and, you know, really get into that. Start reading, read some books, fiction, nonfiction, whatever. But start exercising that part of your brain, because I think that as we're getting to a place right now where the LLMs are writing awesome code. They're doing a great job of it. And if you want to make technology, you need to learn how to really like leverage your authenticity as a human and your creative mind. And that's going to be your differentiator. I really think that artists have always made great developers, and more that's going to be the case. So definitely like invest in a creative practice, whether that's making art, consuming art, music, whatever. I'd say number 2, more and more you need to be able to do everything. So like right now, like to leverage yourself, especially in a startup, which I think we're heading into a market where startup jobs are going to be really, really exciting and awesome. And I would highly suggest that you go that route. But you need to understand databases. You need to understand the back end, the front end, containerization, you know, serverless, edge, a little bit of security, some networking. Like you really got to be able to do it all. And the way to do that is just build some stuff. You know, you've got access to LLMs now. Just vibe code an app and deploy it. Vibe code an app, deploy it, and then vibe code another app to use it and pit them against each other and load test and learn how to scale, learn how to find those edge cases. You know, learn an observability tool. If you don't want to build it, just buy a cheap subscription to like a Grafana cloud or something like that. Really learn telemetry and tracing and logs and all that sort of stuff. I think that, you know, you really have to be a Swiss Army knife. And then the third is start investing in your interpersonal skills. Because again, as LLMs become, you know, the generators of code, the generators of the raw materials of technology, your job is going to be distributing those raw materials. You know, when you're working with developers that are maybe generating their own code, writing some of it, architecting it, however, and then they want to get it to production, you're going to have to talk to them, and you know, they're your stakeholders, they're your customers, as are people like project managers, you know, people up the chain. So start investing in that. Learn like the OKR framework. Start investing in, you know, maybe some courses just on like how to deal with constructive feedback or maybe problematic coworkers. The more incredible of an employee you can be, the better you can get along with people, the more, you know, good hang you are, enjoyable to be around. That's going to be your job security. If you can be creative, if you can do a little bit of everything and people enjoy working with you, you'll probably still have a job in technology for a long time. It's those curmudgeons who can only color inside the lines, and if it's not documented, they can't do it, and like they just don't care enough to like be creative. Those are the ones that are really going to be casualties to AI.
I think me and you both know that we color outside the lines, David, a lot, right?
Yeah.
So that's a superpower, by the way, right? Some absolutely fantastic advice there. So we like to finish the episode with a quick fire round, right? This is where, you know, it's a bit more casual, right? So are you a gamer, David, at all?
I'm not.
Well, I'm not going to ask you the gaming questions. I normally ask people what their favorite gaming console is of all time.
Well, I can tell you that. I like the Sega Dreamcast.
Whoa.
Yeah.
I've just literally packed mine away. I'm moving house. I was a big fan of that back in the day. So
Yeah. Soul Calibur. Solid game. I like fighters. I was like a Mortal Kombat kid. I like that. But yeah, anything past that, I don't.
no,
Yeah.
firing up the terminal too much after that, right? So favorite operating system of all time and why?
Windows 2000.
Do you know what? That's one of my personal favorites as well. Why is it yours?
Just solid as a rock, man. I learned so much on that operating system. Like I dual booted Windows 2000 and Slackware for years, and between the two, I learned everything I know. But like, you know, all my best friendships on the internet, people I'm still tight with, like my glory days were spent in Windows 2000, and I would just always have a place in my heart for it.
That operating system was very instrumental to my career. Like, I just love the bootloader was probably my favorite thing about that
Yeah.
about that operating system as well. I remember switching my computer on late at night, and obviously my dad was like, "Turn it off. You need to get up for school in the morning." And I'd switch it on, and it would just illuminate the entire room because it was white, right? And then Control Alt Delete would come up. But yeah, that's a really good story. I like that, man. The internet journey was definitely full throttle at that point, right? At the Windows 2000 era.
And I definitely, a friend that I met on the internet sent me a burned CD with like the serial written on it. I did not have like a valid copy of it. Sorry, Bill or whoever.
I'm sure you're forgiven, David.
Thank you.
I'm sure you're forgiven. So, where can folks find you, David?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, David Beale. I have a small website that has some socials linked as well, beale.sh. Control
Nice.
Alt Resist is a ghost blog, which you can find via my LinkedIn. I'm not going to rattle off the URL to that. And I'm starting a YouTube channel very soon called Control Alt Rebuild, which will be similar to Control Alt Resist, but definitely taking like a self-improvement and self-help angle to technology, which I think, I don't know, interesting. I'm curious to see how it comes around.
That sounds like a really great idea. I can't wait to see what happens with that. We'll include all the links in the show notes for this episode. David, I just want to say thank you very much for coming on the show. I feel like your story has been really insightful, and you've really given some great takeaways for our listeners there as well.
Kevin, thanks so much. Had a blast. Anytime.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.